Welcome in once again to the Week 11 4 for 4 Fantasy Football Waiver Wire podcast. I am your host, Matt Okada, and we had an interesting week in Week 10. It was not the best that we've seen all year for fantasy. It felt like no one was popping off. A bunch of the people that were supposed to do well were just doing like okay. And all in all, felt a little disappointing. Minus the Thursday night football game, which was amazing, and the Sunday night football game was actually pretty decent as well. Let's all cross our fingers for the Monday night football game tonight between the Dolphins and the Rams. Assuming everyone's healthy, that could be a blast. But that is the week in past. Now we look to the week in future because we have a bunch of pretty good ads this week, particularly if you need help at the wide receiver position. This week's column on 4for4.com is called Casting a Wide Receiver Net. Wide receiver in parentheses net. Okay, moving on from my terrible puns. The point is, there are a good number of names that could be legitimately great, and then quite a few names that have some intrigue. We'll go through a few of them here because on this podcast, we hit the top 5 in my overall priority. And then we'll answer some questions from the chats. So if you've got those, start dropping them in now. If you want the full lists, the priority order of every single position and every single guy that I like at every position, and a bunch of running back handcuffs to add, and all kinds of great stuff, go check out the column on 4for4.com. If you are not subscribed, if you're not a 4for4 subscriber, you will want to do that to get access, and you can do it for a 25% discount with promo code YouTube, because that's where we are right now, unless you're watching us on Twitter, which is also possible. 4for4.com/plans and use promo code YouTube. All right, let's get into the list. The first name is going to be one that a lot of people here are familiar with if you've been here the last few weeks, but we have to hit it again because Cedric Tillman remains just 58% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Some of this can be attributed to the fact that he is coming off of his bye week. The Browns just had their bye, though that makes him even more desirable now because he doesn't have a bye rest of season. Some of it may have to do with his rest of season schedule. It is pretty tough, all things considered. That being said, I do not care about the matchups, and I cannot believe that he is not more heavily rostered. This guy needs to be in 100% of leagues, on 100% of rosters, and more often than not, except in shallow leagues or if you've got really good wide receiver depth, he should be near 100% of starting lineups. In the 3 games of the post-Amari Cooper era, after Cooper was traded, Tillman, who's very clearly stepped up as the wide receiver 1, is averaging 10.7 targets, 7 catches, 85 yards, and 1 touchdown per game. He is a good volume play. He is a good air yards play because he's getting targeted downfield, whereas Elijah Moore is more of the underneath guy. And he is a good touchdown play because he seems to be Jameis Winston's favorite target when it counts downfield in the red zone. His touchdown in week 9 was an incredible toe tap in the end zone itself on a very, very late, I think it was actually last second of the game play. He may not be the wide receiver 1 rest of the season, which is what he was these first 3 weeks post Amari Cooper, literally the highest scoring receiver in fantasy. I don't think he'll be that. The matchups will catch up. People will maybe start to, push coverage his way a little bit more. But he is shown to be a very talented player who catches everything thrown his way, who catches touchdowns when they're available, and who has Jameis Winston at quarterback, which, he's not the best NFL quarterback, but we've all known for many years that what Jameis Winston does more than anything or better than anything in fantasy or better than anything in football, except maybe throw interceptions, is provide fantasy value to his wide receivers. So Cedric Tillman is a must add. If we get out of this week and he's not up to 80, 90%, I'm going to have words with all of your parents. This is a disaster. Get him on a roster. I'm hoping that the 58% here is all the people in this chat, and that all the Yahoo managers that don't, or all the Yahoo leagues that don't have Tillman, just aren't listening to 4for4. But if you're here and if he's available on waiver wires, go get him. I put in the column and in this show that I have a max fab bid recommendation of 15%. But that's just because I don't think you need to bid more than that, given the fact that he's coming out of his bye and it's been 2 weeks since he played, and he's already not heavily rostered or not 60% rostered. I would blow the rest of my fab in most cases with most remaining budgets, regardless of what it is. But I don't think you need to. So that's Cedric Tillman. Big ad. Get him. All right. Let's go to number 2. Number 2 is another guy who's made the waiver column before, but it might have been a while since we've thought about him. It is Jauan Jennings. Of course, everybody remembers when he scored 41 fantasy points back in week 3. It was one of the craziest games of the year from a fantasy perspective by far. But you might have forgotten him since, because over the next 6 calendar weeks, he scored 16.3 fantasy points total combined. 41 in week 3, 16 over the next 6 calendar weeks. Now, that included a bye week, and it included multiple games he missed with a hip injury. But still, he hasn't scored big fantasy points for us in a month and a half. This past week on Sunday against the Buccaneers, he returned. He had 11 targets, caught 7 of them for 93 yards. So right back into a high priority role for the 49ers. Now, the Bucs are a very soft defense, so we could have expected a pretty good game from many of the pass catchers, and we got a pretty good game from many of the pass catchers. Brock Purdy threw for 353 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jennings led the team, though, in every category except for touchdowns, because he didn't catch one. 11 targets was the most. CMC had 7. Ricky Pearsall and Deebo Samuel each had 6. Jennings had the most catches with 7. McCaffrey had 6. Most yards with 93. Pearsall had 73. And then Pearsall and Kittle were the ones to score the touchdowns. He's right at 60% rostership, so he barely makes this cutoff, and this will be the last time we see him in here, barring him disappearing. But if that happens, I'm probably not putting him back in here anyways. With Brandon Ayuk out, Jennings is going to be a very valuable wide receiver rest of season. Now, the main difficulty here is I can't say he's going to be a wide receiver 2 rest of season, or even a wide receiver 1 rest of season. It's hard to be confident about just how high he will finish because of how much the 49ers have. It is absurd that they can lose Brandon Ayuk, who's, I don't know, a top 15 wide receiver when he's playing at his prime, which maybe never really happened this year after the holdout. They can lose Brandon Ayuk and still have George Kittle, the best tight end in fantasy right now, Deebo Samuel, one of the most versatile, talented, untackleable receivers in the game, Christian McCaffrey, the best receiving running back in the NFL, and now Ricky Pearsall, a first-round pick who's looking pretty good and makes the waiver column, by the way, and Jauan Jennings, who has had 2 incredible games this year and has looked very, very good with the opportunity he's been given when he's gotten it. That's all with Brandon Ayuk out. And the problem for Jennings is that all those guys make it hard to trust his floor and ceiling, because there may still be games where he just disappears because it's a Kittle and CMC game with Deebo breaking off a couple huge plays and Ricky Pearsall getting the scraps. Nothing for Jennings. I don't think that will be the case. I think that Jennings is likely to be one of the top 2 targets most weeks. I think he has a chance to lead the team in receiving yards every week. In fact, I think he'd probably be the favorite to do that. And then touchdowns, of course, will be spotty, but such is life. I have him at 8 to 9% fab bid. You could go more than that, and I would not be offended or upset at all. And you could probably go less than that and still get him in some leagues, just based off the fact that he still is only 60% rostered. Again, coming off injury and the bye week, so that's why this number is so low. It will never be this low again, most likely. And it could jump up all the way to like 90, 95% this week because he had a good game, and some people remember the 41-point blow up. Regardless, go and get him. I think 8 to 9% should do it, but you can go 10, 15, and if you have a competitive league or sharp league, that would not be a bad move at all. My best guess is that he will be a high-end wide receiver 3 rest of season with a little bit of inconsistency compared to some other guys just because of all the other weapons there, but he's going to be good. All right, let's get to number 3. Number 3 is Justin Herbert. Kind of maybe a surprising name for some people because we haven't really talked about him all year. And as I mentioned in the waiver wire column, that's honestly because he has flown so under the radar that he flew under my radar these last few weeks. Started the season absolutely terrible. 6 straight weeks to start the year with fewer than 15 fantasy points. So that's why we haven't been thinking about him. He's not rostered in 60+% of leagues. And we haven't been excited about adding him these last couple weeks, even though now he has scored 19 plus fantasy points in 3 straight weeks. This past Sunday, he did it with 32 yards and a touchdown on the ground. The prior 2 weeks, he was passing like old Justin Herbert, hitting big fantasy production through the air. I think it looks like to me like he has gotten used to the new system there in LA with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. It took some time to adjust. Very different from what he had been playing in years past, but that now it has happened, and he's starting to click. Interestingly enough, this is without Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, but Ladd McConkey is playing well. Joshua Palmer had some decent games this past week and has been a little better. Quentin Johnson has been stepping up a little bit more. He's got enough, I think, to be productive rest of season. That being said, as excited as I am about how much better Herbert looks of late, this is primarily about his upcoming schedule as well. He gets, in Week 11, the Cincinnati Bengals, 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. In Week 12, the Baltimore Ravens, who are 29th, and as we all know, one of, if not, no, not, I can't even say one of, they are the best pass funnel in the NFL. In other words, their run defense is so good and their pass defense is so bad that they literally force offenses to throw more than they would like, which is exactly what we want when we're working with Justin Herbert, because if the Chargers had their way, they would probably run it a lot. But when they do pass it, Herbert is great and it works out well. So, and then in Week 13, it's the Falcons, who are 20th in AFPA. Not scary matchup either. Probably one of, if not the best upcoming schedules for quarterbacks, which means he is a strong QB1 for the next month. You can stream him for that time. If he continues to play really well, we can consider holding him on after that. I probably wouldn't. I think I'm going to play these 3 matchups and then go back to streaming somebody else. But, Justin Herbert is arguably one of the best NFL quarterbacks in the league, whether or not he has been for fantasy. So maybe he just shows over the next few weeks that he's an elite stud again, and we keep him. I've got him at a 5 to 6% fab bid. You probably don't even need that in a lot of leagues if you're in a 1 QB league, but that's what I've got to lock it down, because Herbert's talent plus these 3 matchups is like he could legitimately be a top 3 quarterback in fantasy over the next 3 weeks combined. And that's what we want when we're streaming. So go snag him. Coming in at number 4 in what has to be the most wild surprise of the week, it is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That is right. The former Bill this very year, former all kinds of other teams over the years prior, is now a New Orleans Saint. If I asked you to tell me what team he's on before saying that, could you even have done it? I probably wouldn't have, because I forgot that they went and signed him when the Bills cut him a few weeks ago. And then he has not done anything, obviously, for a few weeks. Very understandable. Needs time to adjust, gain some rapport with his quarterback, Derek Carr, who wasn't playing for the first couple of weeks, the worst week or so that MVS was there in New Orleans. But in week 10, apparently everything clicked into place, and MVS blew up for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns on just 3 catches. Now, in a lot of cases, I would look at that stat line, I would look at MVS, knowing who he is, and say, this is going to be so inconsistent, I want no part of it. However, this is a very unique situation because there is a hole in this offense, and there's a hole in Derek Carr's eye line that fits exactly what MVS does and did it to such a high level at the beginning of the season that he posted double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the first 5 games. This, of course, is the Rashid Shaheed hole. Rashid Shaheed was playing like arguably the most consistent, quote-unquote inconsistent deep ball big play receiver in the league and in fantasy over the first month plus of the season. And it was because Derek Carr was constantly chucking it downfield to him. He may have had, 5, 6, 7 targets a game, but when 3, 4, 5 of them are 30-plus air yard bombs, it's not hard to catch a couple of those and quickly put up a great fantasy day. So they very clearly went out and got MVS for this exact reason. Because Rashid Shaheed, in case I forgot to mention it, suffered a season-ending injury. They wanted somebody who could fill this role and who Derek Carr could chuck the ball downfield to. And it, made their offense very effective in the beginning of the year. That's fallen off of late because Derek Carr missed time and Rashid Shaheed's been gone, and probably some other reasons as well. But they went and got him intentionally, MVS, intentionally to play this role, which means they're going to continue to force the ball down the field to him, I believe. On top of all of that, Chris Olave has been placed on injured reserve with these ongoing concussion concerns. I think it's very possible that he does not return this season, and it's looking less than impossible that Chris Olave never plays football again, which is super unfortunate, obviously. But with that being said, it is not impossible after Mason Tipton and Bub Means failed to step up with any consistency for New Orleans that MVS is just like one of the first looks for Derek Carr rest of season and probably his top wide receiver. Obviously, he has Alvin Kamara at running back, Taysom Hill at tight end, who's catching more passes lately. Those guys are going to be heavily, heavily involved, and they've got a couple other tight ends there. So I don't think MVS is ever going to be a double-digit target guy or, even leading the team in targets consistently. But he might lead the wide receiver room in targets consistently, and he might get 7 targets a game as they continue to build chemistry there with Derek Carr. And when you're averaging 25 air yards per target, you don't need that many targets to be really good for fantasy. So I have MVS as a 5 to 6% fab bid, which honestly, I think I came in initially to this week thinking, or to the writing of the column, thinking I would have him at like 2% maybe, because he's so inconsistent and always has been in his career. But I just think that the opportunity in New Orleans is too good that he's going to be a more consistent version of himself than we've seen in recent years. And I think that we can trust, quote, big, quote unquote, trust MVS moving forward. So I'm willing to spend up a little bit more. He's only 1% rostered in Yahoo League, so super available. Yeah, go out and get Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And at number 5, the last spot on the list, we actually have a second Browns wide receiver and a 4th wide receiver overall. So as I mentioned at the top, this is a heavy wide receiver week. There are a few interesting running backs that are heavily handcuff plays that you can go check out in the waiver wire column. But if you're looking for players to plug into lineups, wide receiver is the position this week. And I think Elijah Moore is another one of those guys that you can honestly plug into lineups, primarily in PPR leagues, because he's the antithesis of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who gets few targets but deep air yards. Elijah Moore gets a lot of targets with very short area, easy catch and run type targets from Jameis Winston. In the 2 games Winston has started, Elijah Moore has 21 targets combined. That is unbelievable. It is not likely to change significantly moving forward because it's not like the Browns are going to have tons of opportunities to run out the clock a lot. They are not a great team. They're not going to be a great team. I think they're going to have to pass a lot. And with Jameis Winston passing a lot, I would like to have the guys who are earning his targets. And those guys are Cedric Tillman, who we touched on earlier, and Elijah Moore. He needs a high target share, again, antithesis of MVS, to be productive because he's, like this past week or the last time they played, which was 2 weeks ago, he had 9 targets, only caught 3 for 28 yards. So it wasn't great. And that's one of the main reasons he's not rostered, by the way, only in 8% of league because he had a really bad week in week 9 and then he had the bye. But remember, the week before that, 8 catches for 85 yards. And even in that last game when he had only 3 catches for 28 yards, he had 9 targets, which you're not going to get from a lot of waiver wire guys. I think he is a PPR flex play, a good PPR flex play rest of season. So if you play in a PPR league and you're looking for wide receiver depth, I think Elijah Moore is a really, really great ad. That is the top 5. There are a lot of other good ones, including a wide receiver. That just the next wide receiver in the list is a great ad that I think could be flexed all over the place. And then there are multiple new names in the running back section. There are some quarterbacks that are very worth starting over these next few weeks if you can't get Justin Herbert. There's the whole handcuff list. So if you're not, if you're not a subscriber and you want to get all those names, go to 4for4.com/plans and subscribe. Use promo code YouTube for 25% off, and you will get access to my 3,500 to 4,000 words every single Tuesday morning with all these names. All right, let's get into some Q&A. There are not a lot of questions in the chats right now, so if you are in here watching on YouTube or on Twitter, drop some questions in there. Guys you want to add, guys you need to know if you should drop, but also any other fantasy questions, trade questions, start-sit questions for the coming weeks, big overall NFL top-level questions. I'm willing to answer any of them. So drop them in there, and we'll get to what we can. Jermaine Robinson starts us off. Why is Brian Thomas on the back of my milk carton? Lol. Good question. Very unfortunate question. So the past, 4 weeks now, he has had fewer than 6 targets. Prior than that, he had a stretch of 4 straight games with 6+ targets. It is worth noting in the first 2 weeks of that stretch, he still had 89 and 60 yards and scored a touchdown in both. But these last 2 weeks, 2 catches for 22 yards, no touchdown, 2 catches for 12 yards, no touchdown. It's really rough. The main difficulty here is Mac Jones, I think, is probably going to be playing the rest of the season at quarterback for the Jaguars. It looks like Trevor Lawrence and his injury are going to be a just shut him down kind of scenario, in my opinion. And I don't like the idea of Mac Jones with Brian Thomas rest of the season. It did not look good in the first week of that experiment. My optimistic hope is that Brian Thomas's talent wins out and Mac Jones realizes he should start throwing the ball to him again, or to him at all. That's my optimistic hope. My pessimistic view is that Mac Jones likes throwing into tight ends instead. He peppered the tight ends this past week. And Brian Thomas never sees enough targets to get back up to the level he was playing at earlier this year. Now, what does this mean for your fantasy moves? Like, are you trading him? Are you dropping him? You're absolutely not dropping him yet. We'll keep watching this. It's going to take a month of this before I feel good about dropping Brian Thomas because, again, he was, borderline wide receiver 1 for the first couple months of the season. Can you trade him right now? It depends on who you try to trade him to, because if you trade him off name value, it's like Brian Thomas is a rookie. So how much name value does he actually hold to the casual player? If you try to trade him off his start to the season, yes, that's your main hope here, is that you can say, look at this guy was a borderline wide receiver 1 for the first couple months of the season. He had a couple bad games, so you're buying him low, but he's probably going to go back to that. So pay me a wide receiver 2 price. I don't think that's going to be the case. Unfortunately, I think you're not going to get that level of return. And I don't know if I'm going to sell him right now for wide receiver 3 or lower price or value. So I think that my goal with Brian Thomas is to hold him for a couple more weeks, hope things change. If he's not getting the targets and he has 1 week where he gets a blow up 60-yard touchdown, then I might try to just sell immediately off of that. But again, I'm hoping talent wins out here and the targets return. That said, like, just to be very transparent, I do not have a lot of confidence in this situation. It's tough. And if you want to go out and send some feelers to see if you can get a high-end wide receiver 3 return and just take that and move on, I wouldn't blame you at all. C Mass says, are BTJ, who we just touched on, and CeeDee Lamb fried, or can either slash both salvage some good weeks? So we just touched on Brian Thomas Jr. As for CeeDee Lamb, another tough one. Obviously, with Cooper Rush at quarterback, we expected things to get a little less ideal. They were horrific. Cooper Rush was absolutely abysmal against the Eagles this week. Let me pull up his numbers. 13 of 23, 4. Are you sitting down? 45 passing yards. I have not seen a more disappointing stat line, maybe ever, particularly as a CeeDee Lamb manager, because that is like, that's not even NFL quarterback play, right? That is, I'm going to need to go find somebody else to play if I'm the Dallas Cowboys. Now, they do have Trey Lance, who they let into the game eventually. I don't know how much better he'll be, if at all. And it's worth noting, in Cooper Rush's career, he had never started a game and thrown fewer than 100 passing yards. And he'd only had 1 game under 180 and only 2 games under 200. And that's out of 6 starts prior to this one. So, like, this isn't Cooper Rush. This was bad. Maybe just had a week to prepare Cooper Rush. Normal Cooper Rush will throw for 200 yards, probably. And it's worth noting, despite all this crap, CeeDee Lamb saw 10 targets and caught 6 for 21 yards. So he had nearly 50% of the yards share. He had nearly 50% of the completions share. And he had nearly 50% of the target share. That's crazy. And it means that when Cooper Rush gets up to 200 yards, which again, he should do, CeeDee Lamb could be looking at 100 yards. So I actually don't think CeeDee Lamb is cooked. I think this was a major fluke. And it was worth noting that was all nearly 50% of Cooper Rush's numbers. Trey Lance also was 4 of 6 for 21 yards. So the percentages drop a little bit for Lamb. But still, he was a major factor, just didn't get anything in the yardage department because neither quarterback could throw the ball for worth their salt for more than 10 yards. Still, CeeDee Lamb's involvement was there. The quarterbacks will figure something out. You simply cannot go the remaining months of the season as Dallas with a quarterback that's throwing 45 yards. So if he can't get more than that, they will go pick up someone off the street who can. But again, I think he can. So do not freak out about CeeDee Lamb. In fact, I would consider going and trading for CeeDee Lamb because if the person is looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm doomed, Cooper Rush will never support CeeDee Lamb, and they'll sell you to him for a cheap wide receiver 2 price, I would buy that. Yeah, and it's going to be better in PPR now, of course, because the efficiency in the yards and touchdowns is going to drop, but he's going to get a lot of catches still. Jermaine Robinson says, would you trade Nick Chubb for Cedric Tillman straight up? I think I know the answer. I just want you to confirm. Ooh, that is an interesting one. So that's going to be heavily dependent on your roster because trading a starting RB close to RB1, I'm not probably I'll say mid-range RB2 for a wide receiver 2 is usually not ideal, but If you have the depth to do that, I would absolutely consider doing it. I think from a flex point perspective, in half PPR or PPR, Cedric Tillman will outscore Nick Chubb rest of season, I believe. So that means that if these guys are, your third, fourth, or fifth at their positions respectively, and you're flexing them, then I'd rather have Cedric Tillman. That said, from a pure points perspective, that said, if Nick Chubb is your a running back 2 or 3, uh, if you are playing in half PPR or non PPR, and or if your running back depth is just not that great, then this becomes much more close because again, the positional scarcity of running back gives Nick Chubb more value than just the fact that I think Cedric Tillman will score more fantasy points. Nick Chubb's, I don't think is going to score that many fewer fantasy points than Tillman rest of season. Maybe, even 1 or 2 a game, as little as 1 or 2 a game fewer. So if you can get the positional scarcity of Chubb and not lose that much, and he's going to be in your running back slot a lot rather than your flex slot where you could be starting Tillman for more points, then I prefer maybe holding on to Chubb. It's close, though. Pinoy Penn says, Romeo Dobbs, was dropped in my PPR league. Would you take him over any of the top 5 you have mentioned? No, I would not. Well, let me look at his numbers real quick. Romeo Dobbs is a tough one because he started the year really bad, and then he did that complaining thing, and he started getting more targets. So he got 10 targets out of that complaining week. He caught 8 for 94. Then he had 6 targets, caught 3 for 72 against the Jaguars, who are the best matchup in fantasy. And then he had 5 targets and caught 4 for 28 against the Lions. So since that blow-up week after his complain session, he has slowly dropped back down. There was some, obviously, Jordan Love injury to worry about in that span. All that said, I don't feel great about Romeo Dobbs. I don't think he'll be consistent. I would rather have Tillman. I would rather have Jennings. He's in the MVS and Elijah Moore tier, basically, or between the two. Probably I'd say in the tier with MVS, and then Elijah Moore is a little behind, gets closer in PPR, much closer in PPR. But I definitely would not even be close to considering him over Tillman or Jennings. So if you can get either of those guys, I would do that for sure. And there are a number of other players at other positions I would probably add over Romeo Dobbs. I don't feel good about him. I never am going to feel confident starting him, and I don't like that when it comes to my fantasy players, even if he's likely to average a good number rest of the season. Pinoy Penn says, why did Audric Estime not make your top 5? Audric Estime did not even make my top 10, actually, although he was pretty decently high in the running back list. And that's for a few reasons. One, yes, I know that he took over the lead back role in Denver by a mile this week, at least in terms of carries. He saw 14 carries. Jaleel McLaughlin saw 2, and Javonte Williams saw 1 for some inexplicable reason. I have no idea why. Estime played 46% of the snaps, which, I'd much rather see 50 to 60% of the snaps before I'm going to feel confident about starting someone. But more than that, I don't feel confident that Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin aren't going to rotate in as the lead guy here. Like, Javonte had been the clear lead back for a long time and had been posting decent numbers, 80-plus scrimmage yards in 4 of the 6 prior games. He had been very inefficient, but Audric Estime was not efficient this week. He had 3.8 yards per carry, which is basically what Javonte Williams has been running. So I have Audric Estime as an ad, at least in deeper leagues, because he showed, or the Denver showed, that they wanted to give him a chance as the lead back. The reason I don't have him in the top 5 is because he didn't really capitalize all that well on the job or on the opportunity. The other 2 guys are still, I think, likely to be rotated in. And then, this isn't a high-flying, high-scoring run-first offense to give me confidence in a hot-hand type committee situation. So this is like Tampa Bay, but worse, and I don't even feel good about starting the Tampa Bay guys right now, except for probably Rachaad White in PPR. But I don't feel great about starting Bucky Irving. And up until this week, Audric Estime was the Sean Tucker. Now we'll see moving forward whether he's not, and I do think he should be stashed away in the chance that Denver just turns to him, never gives more than 2 carries to the other 2 guys, starts estimating more snaps, etc. So that's my answer to your question, Pinoy Pens, but I do think he should still be added. Senor Rojo says, do you see Tillman as a wide receiver 2 or flex rest of the season? Thanks. I think borderline between those two. Low end wide receiver 2 or flex. In the tough matchups, of which there are many. In fact, I'll pull it up real quick just to let you guys know. I will probably have him as more of a flex, and then in the good matchups, I'll have him as a low end wide receiver 2, maybe mid range wide receiver 2. So next week he gets the Saints, which is 17th in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Not scary at all. But then the next 4 weeks, Pittsburgh, who are 6th, Denver, who is 4th, Pittsburgh, who is 6th, and Kansas City, who is 2nd. All in AFPA. That's a really tough stretch. Then he gets the Bengals, who are 19th in week 16. That's pretty nice. And the Dolphins are 7th in week 17. That's not nice. So 5 of the next 6 matchups after week 11 are really, really tough. Really, really tough for wide receivers. As I mentioned earlier, I still like Cedric Tillman so much, and I think his role is so good and his talent is so good that I want to add him everywhere and start him everywhere. But these games may make him a flex play rather than a high-end or mid-range wide receiver 2 play. Brad McCoy 24 asks, I have Amon-Ra, DJ Moore, Waddle, Olave, and Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver. Should I just say my goodbyes to my fantasy season already? Oof. Yeah, this is sucky because you have Amon-Ra should be great. DJ Moore should be great. Waddle, Olave, all should be like high-end wide receiver 2s, low-end wide receiver 1s. And then you've got Brian Thomas, who should be that same thing after what we saw the first couple months, but has suddenly disappeared. This is one of the saddest groups I've ever seen. Not because like they're not good, because they're all talented, but because they all should be really good and are not right now. And yeah, Olave's I think is droppable. I don't think he returns, and he's on IR for now. So if he does return, it's not until the fantasy playoffs, where you probably won't make it if you're holding on to Olave and hurting yourself. So as for the other guys, let's have some hope in Jalen Waddle tonight. Maybe he finally has a great game. If not, it might be time to abandon ship because he's been so consistently not good. Brian Thomas, I talked about earlier. DJ Moore, I don't feel good about at all. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I feel pretty okay about. You're still starting him willy-nilly. He caught a touchdown last night. I know that we would like to have seen more from him, but he actually ended up with 6 catches on 8 targets and that touchdown, 60 yards. So it's not terrible. Obviously, it's not 8 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown, which is what we would have liked to be seeing from Amon-Ra. But worth noting, he has scored a touchdown in 7 straight games. So for some reason, he's gone from being the 8 catch a game PPR super stud to the catch a touchdown every game guy. So just think of him as Mike Evans, and maybe you won't feel as bad. But yeah, it's tough. This is a really rough situation, Brad. I'm sorry. Jeepster asks, Cedric Tillman or Calvin Ridley going forward? Ridley's schedule is much easier. Yeah, I'm pretty sure every wide receiver schedule is much easier. Let me look at Ridley's game log real quick. So the last 3 games, he has been quite good. And I wonder, actually, does that match up with Mason Rudolph? Oh, I don't even know if he started this week. I wasn't watching this game at all. Who played at quarterback? No, it was back to Will Levis. Okay. So the last 3 weeks, Calvin Ridley has had 15, 8, and 9 targets, 10, 5, and 5 catches, 70-plus yards in every game, and he scored 2 touchdowns this past week against the Chargers. That's pretty dang good. It may be the case that he just needed DeAndre Hopkins to leave, and then he's going to be good rest of the season. So this is tough. I really like both of these guys. Or at least I like the upside for both these guys. I will say that I lean Tillman still, but it's not by much because of that schedule. I just have more concern that Ridley goes back to disappearing out of nowhere. I trust the quarterback much less. And, we saw games from early in the year where he had 8 targets but had 0 catches. I don't think that's impossible to return. So it's very close. I'd say they're a very similar tier, but I'd prefer Tillman by a tiny bit. Mac Fam says, Matt, is John Mechie not an ad? Yeah, this is an interesting one, Mac. I wrestled last night with whether to add him to the column, and I decided not to. Nico Collins, I believe, will be back. Probably next week. John Mechie had 1 second. Hold. John Mechie had 6 targets, caught 5 for 74 yards and a touchdown this on Sunday Night Football. It was amazing. I was a John Mechie truther coming out of college, so I was super excited. It's a great story. He recovered from cancer. That being said, the entirety of the year prior to this game, he had 7 targets, 4 catches, and 36 yards, and no touchdowns. So it is really hard to believe that this wasn't a complete fluke, and that when Nico Collins returns, he goes back to doing nothing. I hope that's not the case, but I'm not going to add him with any excitement or confidence until I see another week of this. And I don't think that he will be heavily added. I don't, he might get up to 10, 15, maybe 20% rostership, but I don't think it's likely to get that much higher than that. We'll see. I'd be curious what other waiver wire columns are writing about him and whether they, all get excited and bump his rostership up. But I'm not convinced. I need to see a lot more of this to consider him a priority add at all. You can add him in deep leagues for like no fab, but otherwise, I'm not excited about it. MacFam asked, this is the separate question, is Mac Jones on your list as well? There's some news that T-Law may be headed to IR. No, Mac Jones is not on my list, even though I do not believe Trevor Lawrence is going to play another game this year, because Mac Jones is absolute booty, would be the best way to describe that. In his first start, 14 completions on 22 attempts, 111 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He's not good, which is why the Patriots caught bait with him after drafting him, I think, 10th overall, 15th overall. I am never going to be excited or even mildly confident starting Mac Jones. And if you're in a 2 QB league, sure, you can add him because you need every quarterback you can get in a 2 QB league, but I will do everything in my power not to start him. I'd rather start Derek Carr. I'd rather start Will Levis most of the time. Yeah, count me out on Mac Jones. CMass asks, how high are you on Jalen Wright, Benson, and Jatavian Sanders as bench stashes? I like all those guys as bench stashes, CMass. None of them actually made the article because they are just that. And Jalen Wright hasn't played yet. If he plays today, or if he has a good game today, that will be pretty interesting, and I might add him to the column. But yeah, really good bench stashes. I like Jalen Wright and Trey Benson as handcuffs. They were both in the handcuff huddle, my section of the column that covers specifically handcuffs, last week. I think I took them both out this week, maybe. I'm pretty sure. But I like both a lot. And then Jatavian Sanders, he scored a touchdown this past week, but was very uninvolved. So that had me keep him out. I'd rather see 6-7 targets than a touchdown, fluky touchdown, because tons of tight ends catch fluky touchdowns all the time that are not worth adding in fantasy. Before that, though, he had been looking pretty good. He was in the waiver wire column last week. So I like stashing him as well over the chance that Bryce Young is better rest of the season and target Sanders a lot. Again, these are deep stashes. Brad McCoy 24 with the super chat. Thank you, Brad. Asking, you actually won't believe this. I'm 7-3 now in that league. In second place, I have Saquon, JT, Hunt, and Tracy at running back, Bowers at tight end. Okay, that is the way to make up for the rough wide receiver core. Also, some of those wide receivers had been better early on in the year. I would maybe say, Brad, it might be worth trying to make a trade. If you can trade Kareem Hunt and one of your, like a Jalen Waddle or DJ Moore, and get a strong running back, I would maybe consider doing that because I think there's a non-zero chance that Kareem Hunt loses his job to Isaiah Pacheco here pretty soon. And you've got Saquon and Jonathan Taylor and Tyrone Tracy, who are all, I think, RB1s or close to it rest of season. Kareem Hunt, you maybe don't even really need. MacFam noted that Mechie had the same targets as Dell. Yes, I'm aware of that. Again, I just think it was most likely a major fluke. Based off what we saw from Mechie earlier in the year. Oh, Brad McCoy 24 went on to say maybe I should trade JT for wide receiver and hope Tracy can be the RB2. You could also do that, but I would rather try to trade Kareem Hunt and a receiver for a really good running back if you can. Oh, sorry, for a really good wide receiver. MacFam says, Matt, yes, Mac Jones because majority of my leagues are Superflex, but I may add him as a stash. Yeah, if you're in Superflex, he needs to be added because every starting quarterback should be rostered in Superflex. But when I tell you he will be my number 30 quarterback when there are 32 teams playing most weeks, I do not exaggerate. He is no value for me in fantasy as a starter. Matt Tate says, trying to get rid of Swift before it gets worse. I can't believe double RB strat worked after failing last year. How was Swift this past week? Because I know he had been really good prior to that. I don't remember what he put up in this game. 16 carries, 59 yards, 1 catch for 6 yards. Not great, and it was a good matchup. So that's a little disappointing. Yeah, he could very well be spotty down the home stretch. Worth noting, these past 2 weeks he has not been as good on the ground because the Bears have been atrocious on offense, and they scored 9 points and 3 points these last 2 weeks. In the middle of the season, they had a stretch where they scored 24, 36, and 35. That was against the Rams, Panthers, and Jaguars, so that's 3 really bad defenses. That's probably part of it. But also, I think that Caleb Williams is going to have spotty weeks, and the offense will suffer, and DeAndre Swift will suffer as a result. But he had a stretch of like 5 straight games prior to this past week where he was quite good, if not really good. I don't know if I'd be running away to sell him. I would want to make sure I get value if you're going to do it. Also, let's just take a quick gander at his rest of season schedule because that could be helpful. Oh, it's tough. It's rough. Vikings in week 12, they are second in AFPA. Lions in week 13, they are sixth. And then he plays those same 2 teams in week 15 and 16. Okay. Looking at that, Matt, I really like a trade. That's a good move. Because if you can trade him not on last week's value, but on the previous 5 weeks' value, I would and go into this next month where he's likely to put up 50 to 60 rushing yards and not be very consistent. I do like that move. I will say I think it's not impossible that he is a good receiver in a lot of these games. So if you play in PPR, I'm a little less eager to trade him away, but yeah, I don't hate that at all. MacFam says, happy Veterans Day to any fellow service members here on chat. Absolutely. Happy Veterans Day. And to anybody listening to the podcast after the fact as well. Thank you for your service. Brad McCoy 24 notes, I already tried trading Kareem Hunt and DJ Moore for Marvin Harrison Jr., but it got vetoed. That is BS, first of all. I would keep trying to make other trades like that and hope that your league or commissioner don't veto like a bunch of buttholes because that is really stupid. A lot of teams could benefit from trading Marvin Harrison Jr. from Kareem Hunt and DJ Moore. And Marvin Harrison Jr. had been pretty inconsistent for a while there. So, like, there wasn't even that much of a difference between DJ Moore and Harrison. That's really dumb. Feel free to DM me on Twitter and ask for a rant against your league because I'll probably record one. That's really stupid. But again, try to make more trades like that. And Matt Tate says, thoughts on Lamb rest of season. Matt, we talked about this a little bit earlier, so you may be joining the YouTube a little late. I think Lamb will be good rest of season. He had nearly 50% of Cooper Rush's production in this past game, and I think Cooper Rush will not throw for 45 yards most weeks. He will be more closer to 200 as he has been in most of his starts in his career. And if Trey Lance takes over, I feel like that could be as good or better. So I feel good about Lamb rest of the season. I think he will be heavily utilized. He might not have scored as many touchdowns or have as many yards, but he'll have a lot of catches, and in PPR, he'll still be a stud, I think. Rob H asks, for defenses, do you agree that Houston is far and away the number one pickup, and then after that is Miami or Detroit? Houston, I believe, is the number one pickup in my column. Yep, that is correct. And then I have the Rams and Dolphins. I don't have Detroit. Let me see why I don't have Detroit. Because I remember, I think, looking at that. Okay, they're too rostered. They're too heavily rostered. So I can't include the Lions. But if they're available in your league, I would absolutely go out and get them. But the Texans are number one for me. They get the Cooper Rush and Trey Lance or Trey Lance Cowboys next week, which is amazing. Matt Tate says, are you taking Lamb or Neighbors rest of season? Lamb. Neighbors, first of all, his quarterback's pretty much as bad as Cooper Rush. Haha, spot the lie. Last 2 games, 6 catches for 50 yards on 11 targets, 9 catches for 59 yards on 11 targets. He's getting so many targets, but it's just not turning into amazing fantasy production. Obviously, if you're in PPR, he's much better there. But if you're in half or non, he has not scored a touchdown since the middle of September. He has not he's not hit 75 yards in 4 straight games. And this is all with a high target share. So it's like hard to trust that he'll be great rest of the season. I think CeeDee Lamb will post better numbers than this more often than not. Mac Fam says, stream defenses against Cowboys rest of season. Yes, absolutely do that. Pretty much anyone, I would say, you can stream against this quarterback situation. Jermaine Robinson notes, this Jets, not a question, but the Jets catastrophe needs to be studied. That defense now has Jacksonville vibes. Yeah, they are struggling. The offense being bad makes the defense worse, but the team as a whole is really, really bad. Mac Fam says, I think Mac Hollins could be a waiver candidate. There's news of Kincaid's knee injury severity. Also, Cooper and Coleman have been out. Good ad for deep leagues. So, funny enough, Mac Fam, I myself added and started Mac Hollins in a dynasty league this past week because that is who's available on waivers, guys like Mac Hollins and nobody else. And I had a really, really rough situation in my flex spot. And so I literally add and started Mac Hollins, and I think he got me like 12 or 13 fantasy points. It was great. I did that because Cooper and Coleman were out. I don't expect Cooper and Coleman's injuries to linger for long periods of time. So you can keep an eye on that. But I don't think they will be, and I think you need to have both out to have any confidence in starting Mac Hollins ever, at all, whatsoever. And even then, you don't feel that great about starting him. He got me 12 fantasy points or whatever, but that was lucky, I would say. He had, I think, a 60-yard reception or something that was most of those points. Maybe it was a 46-yarder. Can't remember. But you are, if you're in a 14-team league with super deep benches, you can tuck them away on Tuesday in case Cooper and Coleman both miss more time. But I just don't think that'll be the case. So I'm not adding Mac Hollins with any excitement in any normal league. Matt Tate says, with Sanders probably missing rest of season, you think Brooks could play a pivotal role down the stretch? Held his stock for so long, and I don't want to get rid of it just yet. So that is Miles Sanders, I assume. Yeah, this is really interesting because Chuba Hubbard, they gave him money, and then he had a really, 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 really good game in Germany after getting paid. 28 carries, 153 yards, and a touchdown, plus 4 catches on 6 targets for 16 yards. Now, this was Jonathan Brooks' last game out, most likely, of the lineup, so he'll be back next week. I have been a Jonathan Brooks truther all season. I have been holding him in many, many leagues all season, and you must continue to hold him to see what happens because you can't hold him all this way and then drop him right before he actually plays a football game. That being said, I will say I am really, really, really worried. The Miles Sanders thing doesn't help me or hurt me or change my opinion at all. I think Jonathan Brooks was going to completely supplant Miles Sanders whether or not he was hurt rest of the season. But Chuba Hubbard is playing so well that I don't know how much Jonathan Brooks will eat into his workload. My hope is that they say, we want to see what Jonathan Brooks has got, and we don't want to overwork our freshly paid running back in Chuba Hubbard. And Jonathan Brooks shows that he's so talented that he gets enough workload to be valuable rest of the season. That's my hope. It is rather optimistic at this point. I don't feel super confident about it. If you ask me whether Hubbard will or whether Brooks will be an RB2 rest of season or a RB4 rest of season, I would say it's more likely he's an RB4 than an RB2. Maybe there's a 50-50 chance, and I think it's the most likely such scenario is that he ends up being like a low-end running back 3. Did I say wide receiver a bunch of times? I meant to say running back. Low-end running back 3. But, again, you have to hold him. You have to see what happens, and you have to cross your fingers that he's really good. And, worth noting, if Chuba Hubbard were to get hurt, which he's taken a lot of a beating these past couple months, Jonathan Brooks could be one of the best handcuffs in fantasy. MacFam notes that Hubbard may have this knee injury lingering. That was I think he said like a dislocated or a subluxated kneecap or something weird happened. It looked really bad, but then he came right back in the game. And he played the rest of the game and got a ton of carries. So I really don't think that this is going to be a lingering issue. Best case scenario for Brooks managers is that it just makes the Panthers consider feeding Hubbard a little bit less and keeping the workload a little bit lighter. That I think is the best case scenario. I don't think he misses games or that it heavily affects his workload. But we'll see. All right. That is it. That's all the questions I've got in chat. And we are at 57 minutes on the podcast. So thank you, everybody, for all the questions. It was a lot of good stuff. Go get Cedric Tillman, for heaven's sakes. I do not want to have to mention Cedric Tillman again in the column or in this show. Good luck in your Monday Night Football matchups. I'm sure a lot of you still have something writing on this game because Dolphins and Rams have a lot of big fantasy players. May your fab bids run true on Tuesday night, and I will see you all either on Tuesday evening in the Discord AMA if you want to show up, or on the Most Accurate Podcast on Friday with John Paulson. Adios. Have a good one.